Okay, tell me about your parents.
My folks, my dad is from Nevada. He played basketball at the University of Nevada. He then went to USC for a master's degree in business administration. He became good friends with my mother's twin brother, and my mom was a stewardess, and those are her words. I know they don't use that word anymore, but she always called herself a stewardess for United Airlines, and she met my dad on the steps of the Doheny Library at USC. From there, Dad got his degree. They got married, and he was a drapery buyer for the Emporium department store in San Francisco. They hated San Francisco. It was foggy all the time, and they were cold. And so he went from there to Hawthorne, Nevada, where my dad was the dairy distributorship for the Yerington Dairy, which my grandfather owned. They lived there for, I don't know, a year and a half. I was born there. And then they moved to Visalia to work with his brother in the natural gas business. And from there, he loved Fords. He had a 40 Ford convertible in college. He wanted to be a Ford dealer. He stopped in Auburn to try to, Colfax, to try to buy the dealership there, but somebody had already bought it, which worked out really well because the Chevy dealer in town was the mayor, and he put 3 different Ford dealers out of business, and there's no longer a Ford dealer there. Came to Dixon, armed with a loan from SBA and a loan from his father, and bought the dealership. There were probably 5 or 6 employees at the time. I mean, they'd sell 1 or 2 cars a month. Ford, you couldn't just buy a dealership now, but at that time, you basically could, and they insisted that he have a sales manager that had been in the business for quite a while, and that guy's name was Tom Callum. And he worked here for quite a few years. He had a local named Houston Shepherd that was his other salesperson, and Carolyn Johnson, who later became Carolyn Panizza, was the office manager. It's a fairly small dealership. We're actually in a part of that building downtown here. Then there was a pizza parlor across the street that had gone out of business, and he had cars parked in the front windows of that place. And then in '61, he built the building out north of town.
And when he was here downtown, had the other Ford dealers that owned the business previously also done that kind of marketing? I mean, putting cars in the
pizza parlor. I'm assuming
street?
he didn't invent that. I'm assuming somebody had done that. This business was Charlie McGimsey had started it in the 20s. There were 2 different dealers in the early 50s, and they only had it for a year and a half or so, and then Dad bought it in '56.
So your dad put his college degree to really good use.
Yes, he did. He had a master's degree in business administration from University of Southern California, and when you get a master's degree in that, you got accounting, you got marketing, you got merchandising, you got everything. So yeah, not many dealers have that degree. So yeah, he was kind of ahead of his time.
Did he know when he went into that coursework that he wanted to get a Ford dealership?
No, what he wanted to do was to be an entrepreneur of some sort. His father came from Italy in 1910, and at one point owned a dairy distributorship, a trucking firm, a mail route, a movie theater, and a restaurant all at the same time in Yerington, Nevada. So the entrepreneur spirit was in my dad pretty clearly. So he didn't know what business he wanted to be in, and he was getting experience and trying to figure out exactly what he wanted to do. So.
Great memories. So what are your earliest memories of Dixon?
I don't know if these are early memories or whether I'm so steeped in our company history, but I can remember this building. I can remember him buying 10 acres north of town on 113. It was just a 2-lane highway at the time. I remember in '61 when I was a little kid, but I rode in every car that they moved out from here out to there. And I can remember that, and I can remember that pizza parlor, and there was broken glass in there. I can remember going to church at the community church that used to be over here. I can remember, let's see, the milk farm, the market that was across the street. I can remember, wow, lots of things.
So what did one do for fun in Dixon as a young boy?
Oh gosh, we rode our bikes around and went over to Pewter Creek. We played football in the park. We played baseball. I mean, we'd leave, in the summertime, we'd leave home at 8 o'clock in the morning after breakfast and be riding on our bikes and cruising around town, you know, not in trouble, but just looking for stuff to do. So.
Now, we're about the same age, and when I was growing up, I remember Methodist Youth Fellowship as one of my weekly activities. Were you active in the church?
We were active at the community church, and I was 5, and for some reason the lady that was teaching the Sunday school didn't end up liking me for some reason, and she had a discussion with my mother about my behavior, and we were invited to leave the church, and we left the church and never went back.
Oh my. So what are your memories of Dixon's public schools?
Oh, kindergarten at the West Side School. I can remember that like it was yesterday. The Olympics were coming in 1960, and I would have been there in 1958, and my parents had taken us skiing, and I told my kindergarten teacher that I was going to be in the Olympics someday, which didn't come to fruition, but I can remember that. Let's see, walking to school. We always walked to school. We were, I don't know, 3 or 4 blocks away, and nobody supervising us, and then when we got older, we would ride bikes to school. I then went to junior high across town to the, I don't know what that school's called now, and then to the high school that is now John Knight Intermediate School. So lots of sports, of course, playing sports every year.
And in like high school, what sports were you?
I played football, basketball, and ran track. I was all league in football, all league in basketball, which you can do when you're in and school record holder in the high jump. You can do that when you're in a class of only 100, and it's pretty small. So we played everything. I can remember playing football at the fairgrounds. They had this big set of grandstands, and we'd walk underneath on the pavement, and our cleats would clack on the ground as we were walking, and all the little kids were there, and they wanted to touch you as you walked by. And I remember being a little kid going to those football games, and then when I got to do it, I thought I was really cool walking through there with all those little kids, you know, yeah, and yelling at you and screaming for you. That was a lot of fun playing there.
And what position did you play?
I was a wide receiver, and I was also a safety.
So you went both ways?
It was, you know, small school, as you do. A lot of guys did. So. But football was a big deal in Dixon in those days. If you weren't on the football team, you couldn't get a date. No girls would dance with you. It was important to be a football player. And you know, with 100 kids, we still had, you know, the varsity was probably 35 or 40 guys. So you know, a big percentage of the student body ended up playing football. Some of them were good, some of them weren't so good.
And you got into skiing early, and your dad was into skiing.
My dad learned to ski when he was in college at Nevada. their Mount Rose is very close to the University of Nevada campus, and we still have his skis. They were 10th Mountain Division skis that had been painted white for the 10th Mountain in World War II, and he bought them and refurbished them. So I still have them at our cabin. But yeah, it was a good way for us to get away from the business. It was 6 days a week. And we weren't open on Sundays in those early days, and it was a good way to get up and out of town, and the whole family skied together. It was a great family activity, and we'd go 6 or 7 times in the year. We'd drive up for the day, and later he ended up building a small cabin on Donner Lake so that the whole family could come, and that's a tradition we continue with my kids, and presumably for their kids when they get of age. So.
Now, is that the cabin where he had the boat that he wanted to show your mom when they were courting?
No, they were courting, and he told her he had a boat on Lake Tahoe, and she was from Indianapolis, Indiana, and kind of on the lower scale of socioeconomics. But to hear that her boyfriend had a boat on Lake Tahoe, she was so impressed. Only when he went out to show her, they walked out on the dock and there were 4 ropes going down to the bottom of the lake, and the boat, she looked down and she thought, uh-oh, red flag here. So that's a family story that she loved to tell about, it was almost over right there. The boat on Tahoe was not impressive.
Were you in scouting?
I was a Cub Scout. We had a very active troop here. Mrs. Curtis was our den mother, and I joined Boy Scouts, and I only lasted a couple of years. We did so many outdoor activities that the outdoor activities of that group seemed to interfere with the activities that we were doing. We were playing sports, we were skiing, we were water skiing, we were camping, we were doing all kinds of stuff, and it didn't seem to add anything. And I was not a particularly good scout, unfortunately.
Well, it does sound like you had other activities going on.
We did, yes.
So you first enrolled at California Polytech.
Yes.
How did you choose that?
I played basketball in high school, and I was following in my dad's footsteps. My coach thought I had an opportunity to play college basketball. He got me into school down there, and I played as a freshman, made the team again as a sophomore, and then got cut when 2 guys that were better than me became academically eligible. I was apparently a placeholder because I was a decent student,
right,
but I wasn't a good enough basketball player to be on the team. So from there, I transferred to UC Davis, tried out for that, did fairly well in their scrimmage, but I was a shooting guard, and at 6 feet, college shooting guards are a minimum 6'4", 6'5", 6'6". I didn't handle the ball long enough to be a point guard, and got cut there and gave it up.
And so in choosing the schools, basketball was more important than academics?
Basketball was the impetus to go to Cal Poly, yes. Transferring to Davis, by that time I knew I needed to help Dad, and I would work there in the summer, and I'd work there on weekends, and I'd work there on holidays, et cetera, et cetera. So that was the point of coming to Davis, and I thought, well, I'll give that a try and see if I can make the team. I'd been a fan of UC Davis. I would have rather have started there, but I wasn't good enough. So.
And when you're helping your dad at the dealership, you're doing mechanic?
I worked in absolutely every department. I worked on cars. I worked in the parts department. I sanded cars in the body shop. I washed cars. I did everything basically. My mechanical career came to an end because Dad got tired of taking me to the ER. I kept getting injured, and I'd walk in and I'd be all covered with blood, and he'd go, "Oh, not again." He says, and he finally took my tools away and said, you're not going to work on cars anymore. And I moved to sales at that point. So.
And your degree at Davis was agricultural development and business management. Was the business
agricultural economics is, yes, that was as close as they had to a business school. And it had accounting and it had marketing. It was basically a business school with an ag emphasis, which wasn't a bad thing because ultimately our business relied on the farmers around Dixon. So, but yeah, we had all kinds of interesting classes. We had viticulture and enology. Unfortunately, I was sick on the wine tasting day and missed the one wine tasting day. But we had to handle sheep and cattle and horses and pigs and all kinds of stuff as part of that. So it was actually pretty interesting. So, but I was looking for the business part of it and the economics.
Looking to work at the dealership here?
You know, I always wanted to be an entrepreneur myself. I wasn't so sold on being at the dealership myself, but it ended up working out that way. In fact, when I got out of USC, I started looking for a business to buy, and I looked at some in Auburn and just they didn't interest me enough to want to pull the trigger, so I just kept working and working and working, and you know, being as part of the family, I was basically an entrepreneur on my own at the dealership, so it worked out fine. Yeah.
And I take it you were really close to your dad.
I am a clone of my father. We thought so much alike, and I'm starting to look like him as he aged, and I'm starting to look a lot like him. I had blonde hair in my younger days, and his was dark, and his coloring was a little different, but we have the same facial features. We thought a lot alike. We could complete each other's sentences. Yeah, we worked together very, very, very well.
Do any of your, what factors led you to choose USC for your MBA?
One is that he got an MBA from USC. My Uncle Jack had an MBA from USC. My Uncle Ira had a dental degree from USC. Dad took me to a game at UC Berkeley in 1963 when the Trojans played Berkeley, and that big white horse and the band playing, and it just seemed like the place for me. And it was when I went, the Trojans in 77 through 79 were always in the fight for the national title, and that Coliseum with 100,000 people in it. That was part of the attraction. The other part was it was a tremendous school. I majored in entrepreneurial, and they were one of the few schools that had that particular option. So it worked out fabulous for me.
And you feel like that educational experience you got both at Davis and USC prepared you well for business?
You know, you had a wide range of business focus, and in the car business, it's different every day. I mean, I could go in on a particular day with a list of 10 things I wanted to do, and you ended up doing 10 other things that came up during the day. And that was one of the things that made it so interesting. Was it was different absolutely every day. And some days you might be working on accounting, some days you might be working on marketing, some days you might be evaluating trade-in. Some days it was just a wide-ranging education, and you need all of that when you're running a small business, particularly a complex business like the car business. There's so many aspects of it. It's interesting. After I retired, I looked into a business that sold. It's called batteries and bulbs, and I looked at it, and it was inventory management and making sure you had everything on the shelves. And a friend of mine goes, "That's not going to interest you at all. That's just inventory management, and you've done so many more things." And he turned out to be right. I didn't end up pursuing it.
So looking back at your undergraduate and graduate coursework, do any of the professors or courses or fellow students stand out in your memory?
My history professor at UC Davis, in addition to the business stuff, I was always interested and still am interested in history. The professor was a man named W.T. Jackson, William Turrentine Jackson, and he was a magnificent lecturer. He was he taught classes in history of the Trans-Mississippi West, basically Western U.S. history, which I'm very interested in. He was an advisor to Wells Fargo on their ads and on the TV show that used to be called Tales of Wells Fargo. He was so knowledgeable, and he was pompous, but he gave these magnificent lectures, and I'd leave and think, man, I got to read some more of this stuff. That sticks out very much. I had a statistics professor at USC, and statistics are very interesting, but he was from Taiwan, and his accent was such that a lot of times we didn't understand what he was saying, and I struggled and I struggled and I struggled. But he held office hours on Saturdays and he held office hours on Sundays to make sure that if you were struggling in this class, he would hold these office hours and you could come in and get remedial training in what he was trying to teach us. Fantastic professor. So yeah, there's two of them for you.
Shows a lot of dedication.
Yes, he was terrific. And he knew that we were struggling with understanding his accent.
So you talked about all of the hard aspects, I think, of running a dealership, keeping up inventory and things like that. But when you get down to it, isn't it really all about relationships with people, with your customers, with your maintenance workers?
Absolutely. And talking to people all day long. We have so many friends in this town just because they'd come in and you know, they were customers and they'd come in and sometimes they'd just stop and say hi, and the relationships are a big part of that. And you know, when you have a dealership, we were so small in those days that it was very rewarding, and as it got bigger and bigger and less getting to know your customers, it became less and less fun over time. So yeah, the relationships. When we were 30 employees, I knew everybody. I knew their wives, I knew their husbands, I knew their kids, I knew all of that. It was really fun. And we'd put on a Christmas party every year and invite them all. When it got to be 60, it gets to be a little bit not as much fun, and when I got to 120, it gets to be less and less fun. But probably I hired a guy named Rich Bedoya, and I forget. He was working for one of the fertilizer companies to be. And became one of my best friends. He's still one of my best friends, and he just bought the dealership in Auburn and named it DuPratt Ford. And he's a tremendous human being. So yes. The relationships are what makes it worth a while.
So you graduate in '79 and come back as a salesman?
Yes, I came back and started working just selling cars. And by then my brother had graduated, and so the whole sales staff was Dad, my brother, and me.
So give me a typical day from the time you wake up to the time you put your head back on the pillow at night.
Okay, usually get up pretty early, try to get a little exercise in before work, get to work 7:30 in the morning, open the dealership. Usually when it was small, I would usually run the dust mop over the floor and dust the cars off real quick so they look nice in the showroom. Check my list. walk out to the shop to see how busy they were, making sure that they didn't need anything, and I'd walk through to make sure the place had been cleaned up the evening before and that the trash had been put away. I'd check the lot to make sure the cars were parked for the best display. You want them to look nice, and sometimes you put up a couple of hoods just in case somebody wanted to look. Make sure they were reasonably clean. You know, it's pretty hard. Dixon can be fairly dusty, and so sometimes they didn't look so good. And then I'd try to find somebody to take care of that. I'd go in the office, check to see if there was any paperwork that needed to be done, making sure that we were getting paid for, that the financing companies would make sure that we were getting checks for those. Lunchtime, Wednesdays were Rotary days, so we'd go to Rotary, eat lunch, come back at 1:30, and start that whole process again. And usually you had customers that would come in. Somebody would want to talk to. A lot of the locals that I dealt with for so long wouldn't deal with anybody else. As we got larger and had other salespeople, they wanted to talk to me, or they wanted to talk to Dad, or they wanted to talk to Val. And so we would, you end up talking to customers all day long, and then if there were any issues in the shop, then I'd get called up and say, hey, you know, here's a problem. We've got to, and go deal with that. And if somebody's cars got banged up, I'd have to take care of that. And and then we'd usually go home we'd close up about 6 o'clock, 6:30ish, and go home, eat dinner, wrestle with the kids, and go to bed.
So when you said we went to Rotary, that's you and your dad?
Yes.
And Rotary, though, I thought limited it to one person per profession.
Well, there's a way to get around that. He was a retail trucks, and I was retail cars. So technically, that's two different categories. So
and you did that. That's formally you presented yourself.
Correct.
Cool.
Correct. They don't worry about that anymore. You can have as many real estate people in your Rotary Club, or as many insurance people, or as many car dealers as you want. But in those days, yeah, it had to be in a specific category. So that's how we did it.
And what kind of speakers would come to Dixon?
Oh gosh, we'd get people from Travis. We had a female pilot that flew C5As that came and talked. We'd usually get somebody from the city council to talk. We'd get people from local politicians, countywide politicians, to come and speak to us. And sometimes there were nutty programs. We had somebody come from a zoo that brought animals, tame stuff, mockingbird or birds and things like that. So it was a wide variety. So we worked pretty hard on. I was a firm believer in programs being a part of Rotary, so that it would interest. So when you go to a meeting, it was an interesting meeting. It wasn't just business. So.
Did you or your dad ever present a program?
I did one. I read up on Gettysburg, and I did one for a number of Rotary clubs called The Road to Gettysburg, and basically recounted how they got to Gettysburg, and then a little about the actual battle. So yeah, Dad presented a few times on the car business. They'd ask him for that. So,
can you talk a little bit more about how important Rotary was to you and your dad?
Yes, Dad was a firm believer in giving back to the community. When the town was 2,000 people, and the town was 7,000 people, and the town was 10,000 people, they provided a pretty good living for our family. And he was a firm believer in giving back. He was on the city council. He was president of Rotary in 1965. He felt like it was important that we be involved. My mom was in Seroptimus and in Women's Improvement. My brother was a Lion. So we were in all of those sorts of programs in town, just to give back.
And did Val pick lines to broaden the family?
He got asked, yeah, I think because Dad was in Rotary, they figured one of us needed to, I got invited to do that at the same time he did, and I didn't want to step on his toes. So I backed off, and he became a Lion. And then at that point, there wasn't any other club for men, so I was destined for Rotary.
So you talked about going in first thing in the morning and dusting off the cars in the showroom. Kind of a silly question, but how do you pick what goes on the showroom floor?
Color. You usually have something that's a cool color. White vehicles sell really well, so you almost always have to have a white one in there of some sort. There was space for 5, so we'd always have a white one, and if there was something red, I'd put something red in there. Or if it was a new color, I'd put something in there with a brand new color. And so yeah, it was color and model. I mean, we always had to have a Mustang. Pickups are one of our big sellers, so we would always try to get a pickup in there as well. So yeah, there was a lot to it. And putting them in there, I was always pretty proud of my ability to display cars in the showroom.
So if somebody comes in and says, I want that very car, not the similar one out in the lot, but that one, how much trouble is it to get a car in and out of the showroom?
It wasn't. When you built the dealership out there, it had a huge door, and it was really easy to get it in and out. Throw those doors open. If you want it today, we're moving it out right now.
So you've seen a lot of Ford models.
Yes.
Which ones stand out in your mind?
Mustang, 1964, came out in April. We got our first one. It was poppy red. It was just a little notchback coupe. Dad got a space at the fairgrounds, and he took it down there, and they put ropes all around it, and the velvet rope treatment. And people were 4 and 5 deep, completely circling that car. It was unbelievable how you couldn't do that now. No, but there's not a car out there that's interesting enough, maybe a Ferrari or something. But for that Mustang, people went wild. And somebody stole the gas cap off the back because it was a cool cap. So Ford ended up making a wire cable so that you couldn't steal that. But yeah, that was May of '64. That was, I can picture that and all the people, and we were just stunned by how many people were so interested in that car. It was cool.
And did you trailer that to the fairgrounds?
No, we drove it down there. Heck, I didn't. I was a kid. But yeah, they drove it down there, and it turned heads. It was so different from what was out there. So, and pretty affordable for, they were in the $2,400 range, which, of course now they're worth a fortune. But so yeah, that one stands out.
What else?
The Fusion that came out in '06, we got, the president of Boeing came to Ford, and Ford was floundering at the time, and they came out with that Fusion, and it sold like hotcakes. It was a tremendous car when some of our cars, I couldn't say that about. It really saved our business. We were losing market share. We were quite concerned about Ford's ability to move forward. 'Cause we always sold pickups, but even then, that Fusion was a tremendous car for us.
Any bad cars?
Granadas. Granadas were terrible cars. In fact, a friend of mine worked his way through college in New Jersey building Granadas, and I said, "Oh my gosh, they were terrible." And he said, "Absolutely. I was there when they built them, and they were awful. They tried to make it into an upscale, nice car, but it just was not. It gave us troubles. They were having union troubles at the time. We'd find bottles in the doors. It was awful, just awful." And of course, everybody hates Pintos, but I have a good Pinto story. I went to a friend of mine Joe Osterman was living in Salt Lake City. He'd been in submarines in the Navy, and he wanted to be away from the ocean as far as he could get. So he was spending the winter in Salt Lake, and he invited me over. Well, I grabbed a used Pinto to drive over there, and I changed the oil myself. And I'm driving out in Nevada, and all of a sudden the oil blows out of the car. Oh my gosh. And so I hitchhiked for about a half an hour. I had my long hair down my shoulders. Nobody, it looked like a hippie. Nobody's gonna pick you up. So I get in this Pinto and I fire it back up. It has no oil in it. The engine's rattling. And I went up this little rise, and then I shut it off and coasted down another rise. I went 30 miles in that car with no oil. I get to Winnemucca. They put it on the rack, and I had inadvertently pressed another rubber gasket, so it had two gaskets on the oil filter, and it didn't hold, and it blew the oil out. So they put another filter on, took both of the little gaskets off, filled it full of oil, started it up, didn't sound bad. So I jumped in it, and I drove it all the way to Salt Lake City. I get to Salt Lake City at midnight, and I get pulled over by a cop. And California uses dealer plates. When the licenses expired, and I had a dealer plate on the back, perfectly legal in California, not legal in Utah at the time. So he puts me in the back of the car, and after an hour of him on the radio, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to jail over this. He says, your license plates don't match. And finally he comes back and he says, all right, I'm gonna let you go. It's late and I don't want to do the paperwork. So I get back in the Pinto and go to my friend's house, spent a week there skiing, had a wonderful time, but came back in that Pinto, and it drove fine. And we checked it all out, and we ended up selling it. A guy had it. He put 250,000 miles on the thing. So everybody talks about how bad Pintos are, but that Pinto was tough because it went 30 miles with no oil.
So I take it you could have picked any car in the lot to drive. Why do you pick a Pinto? And why did your dad always pick a used car when he would drive?
Picked the Pinto because gas was extremely expensive. That would have been 76. It was like a 74 Pinto. Gas was getting close to the oil embargo. It was crazy expensive. It was hard to get, and I knew it would get good gas mileage. I otherwise normally would have driven a pickup. People used to ask my dad why he was driving a particular car, and he said, "'Cause it has gas in it." he always drove them if they had gas, but he didn't put gas in very often. So.
And did he always have a personal car?
Never. No, he would drive something home, something off the used lot, something that had been a fresh trade-in, something like that. Mom always got a demonstrator. I'll have a little story about that. In 1958, Ford made a 4-seat Thunderbird. They'd had the 2-seat Thunderbird 55, 56, and 57. Mom had never had a new car. She drove a Model A in the 40s to college at Purdue. And this car was gorgeous. She loved this car. It was silver with a red and white leather interior. Just absolutely spectacular. He came home one day and said, "I need your keys." She said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, I sold your car." Well, she burst into tears. I burst into tears because Mom was crying. And he said, "Hold that thought, I'll be back." He takes the car, sells it. It was a demonstrator, sells it. He comes back and he puts us on the couch and he said, "We're in the car business. Everything is for sale. Do not ever get attached to a car again." And we never did. So everything was for sale from that day on. So.
And she was always driving the demonstrator.
Yeah, she got the demonstrator. And usually something new, and sometimes it was used, but most of the time it was new. So.
So I assume to be a prosperous business in Dixon, you need to expand your customer base well outside of Dixon. How do you do that?
Well, Rotary ended up being a part of that. Rotary tracks your attendance in coming to the meetings, and when we'd get busy and couldn't go to a meeting, then we would go make up a meeting in Winters, Davis, Vacaville, Woodland, and West Sacramento. And so you're not supposed to advertise it. That wasn't the point of doing that, but people knew what we did because they'd see the license frames that said DuPratt Ford on it, and we felt like that would give us, if they were interested in a Ford, knowing we were Rotarians and what that means to people, they would give us a shot if they were thinking about a Ford. So that was one way of doing that. Another way to do it is trying really hard for customer satisfaction, and that word of mouth gets around. We never spent a lot of money on advertising. We weren't particularly good at it, but our motto was, we treat you like family, and we tried very hard to treat people like family. Yeah, you fail sometimes, but you try. You try hard, and I think people recognize that. And it's word of mouth gets around on that kind of stuff.
And the dealership does have a reputation, I think, still for just outstanding customer service. What factors into that?
Giving it your best effort every day, making sure your customer gets, within the best of your ability, gets their money's worth. One of the things Dad, very early, he was still here downtown, and a customer was very unhappy with the car, and he bought it back from them, gave them their money back, and that word got around town. Dixon was 2,000 people at the time, so that word got around. They were a prominent family. They're still around, and they came back, and they ended up being customers for life, customers and friends. So that's one way you do it, and you insist that your people do their best each and every day. When a technician works on a car, then you spot check them, you drive it, make sure that the problem got fixed, and if somebody has a problem with the car, you move heaven and earth to try to make it right for them. So,
No matter what it costs.
sometimes. Yeah, sometimes. And Dad always said, what's good for the customer is good for the dealership. So,
Do you have a feeling that your competitors didn't do that? And who are your competitors?
well, when we came to town, there was Rossi had GMC trucks and Oldsmobiles. McIntyre had Dodge Chrysler Plymouth stuff. There was an International Harvester dealer here, and there was a Chevy dealer here, and none of them exist anymore. And part of that is Dixon was so small, and the margins got so small for selling cars that it became imperative to get bigger and bigger and bigger to try to make a living at this thing. I can't say, I think everybody that was here tried to keep people happy, but sometimes some people get focused on the sales part of it and not the satisfaction part of it. So it's true of some dealers, and it's not true of other dealers.
And at the dealership, do you make more money out of the sales division or out of the service division?
The business has changed significantly. In the 60s and 70s, you made a reasonable living on selling each car, but now we're trying to keep 2 pennies out of every dollar that we take in. So it becomes imperative to try to make a profit in each and every department. But the new vehicles, you can look it up. You look at a particular vehicle, you can go look it up right now, and you can find out what the dealer paid for it. So, what other business do you know what the seller of their product Do you know what their costs are? So people drive hard bargains, and so you don't make any money on that. You make a little more money in used cars because I might have the only, say, Ford Raptor used pickup for miles and miles and miles. So I've got a chance to make a little money in that. I got a chance to make a little money in the service department. It's hard work. Make a little money in parts. We make a little money in the body shop. And when we sell you the vehicle, if we finance the vehicle, we make a little more money there. So you try to keep 2 pennies out of every dollar that you take in. So it's what drives volume. Then you have to have more and more and more volume to make a decent living out of that, because of the costs of your building, your costs of your lights, your cost of all of those fixed costs.
So when you become a salesman in '79, does all your previous work as a mechanic help you in selling
Sure
cars?
it does. If somebody brings a trade in and it's got an exhaust leak, I know what that exhaust leak is, and I know pretty much what it's going to cost to fix it. So absolutely, that made a big difference. And also from the standpoint of customer satisfaction, somebody buy a car and it had a problem, and they'd come back, and they'd come back and talk to me about it. I could pretty well figure out what was going on and what it was going to take. And if it was a serious problem, then you find a nice loaner for them while you're taking care of their problem. Cars have gotten so much better now, though. In the old days, gosh, the things that we used to do in the shop that we don't do anymore. We used to overhaul carburetors. We used to do valve jobs. We'd take the heads off and grind the valves and put new valves and things like that. None of that's done anymore. Everything is plug and play. So it's a different business now.
Is it safe to say that Dixon is a car town?
Dixon was a car town. I would say probably more of a pickup truck town. But in the old days, yeah, people paid attention to cars. Every year we would have when the new Fords would come out, we'd put them in the showroom and put out some cookies and coffee and things like that for people, and people would come in and peruse the new Fords, which was always kind of fun. But when they became the same every year, then that kind of went away. And I don't know that anybody's really a car person anymore. Cars are pretty kind of bland looking to me from my standpoint, but pickups for sure. We always sold pickups, even when the cars wouldn't sell at all. We always sold pickups, so it's a pickup town.
I tend to think of people keeping pickups longer than they keep cars. Is that not true?
That is true. That is absolutely true. People will run pickups for a lot more miles. Well, people drive cars a lot longer now than they used to. I saw a statistic the other day. The average car, the age of the car fleet is like 8 years when it used to be running 3 and 4. But pickups, I mean, I have a Ford pickup that my son is driving. It's got 250,000 miles. Didn't used to think, I wouldn't keep a vehicle that long. But they're built tough, and if you don't abuse them, they'll last a long time. So I think that's why a lot of people like them. And I drive a pickup. I'm always got skis in the back, or I've got yard tools in the back, or I've got something in the back of them. So it's just for my lifestyle, it works really well, and I think it works for a lot of people. The outdoor people like pickups.
So at what point did your dad start to ease away from his daily activity? Or I know not daily, his daily running of the dealership.
He got on the bank board at the First Northern Bank, and at that point I self-appointed as the general manager. He didn't ever actually give me the title. In fact, I went in one time and said I was looking for a raise, and he said, well, I was thinking about letting you go, so I'm going to just reduce your salary a small amount. Of course, he was being funny, but that's kind of I self-appointed myself as the general manager, and he just kind of went with it, and trusted me and believed in me, and so he was probably in his 70s at that point, but he worked until he was 90, and much to my mother's chagrin, she wanted to travel, and then they got too old to travel.
So, say in his late 80s, what would a typical day like be for him?
Oh, he'd come in and he'd open the mail, he'd look at the books, he'd talk to Pete, he'd talk to me. He was on top of it. It was his baby, and
What time would he get there?
7:30.
Okay.
Go home at 5. He was always there. Yeah. So he didn't cut himself any slack. So.
And you were happy to see him?
Oh yeah, we got along so well. I mean, we obviously clashed on some things when I had an idea, and sometimes he had an idea that I didn't like. But for the most part, yeah, we thought alike. So it was a good relationship, and it was fun.
And I bet the customers liked seeing him.
And he had people that would come in and talk to him. In fact, the people that he bought that car back in the 50s, they'd come in and talk to him right up until they passed. So, yeah, he had a lot of people that liked him and respected him.
Can you give me an example of a time when you had an idea that he didn't like and how you sold him on it?
Well, let's reverse that. He bought the property out on the freeway and wanted to put up just a showroom and a display lot. And I didn't think it was a good use of the money. And so we argued that out, and I lost the argument because he owned the business. But it turned out he was right, I was wrong. It ended up put us kind of on the map when you talk about people driving by could see the dealership, see the sign, see the name, that sort of thing. In fact, I have friends that I'll meet people and they'll say, "Hey, name's familiar," and then they'll say, "Yeah, you're from Dixon." Yeah, we're from Dixon. So yeah, that was the biggest one. It was a big expenditure of money, and I was against it.
So you've been a mechanic, you've been a salesman, a sales
Use
manager.
that term mechanic loosely. I worked on cars.
You were a bloodied mechanic.
There you go.
You've been a general manager.
Yes.
Which of those jobs did you enjoy the most?
Oh. That's a great question. I think in the 80s and the 90s, when I was just selling cars and opening up the dealership in the morning, and the people, we had 30 employees, 40 employees, I think that was when I enjoyed the car business the most. As it got bigger and as the margins got tougher and as all of that, the general manager job was not, I wouldn't ever describe that as fun. It was interesting because everything was different every day, but worrying about going out of business. I mean, you could have a bad month and lose money, and you got to figure out how to change things in order to adjust that, because we closed our books every month. You had 12 different sets of profit loss calculations, and it wasn't nearly as much fun when I wasn't worried about the business, and when I was just selling cars and talking to people. That's when it was fun. I wasn't a good enough mechanic to have that to ever be fun.
So I wanted to ask what was most challenging, and it sounds from what we've said so far that perhaps being a mechanic was the most challenging and being the general manager was the most intellectually challenging.
That's a good description. The physical part of being a technician, and I marvel at some of these guys that are still working on cars, you know, clambering in and out of them, leaning over hot engines, physically tough. And I've had a couple of them that retired fairly young just because they were beat up. And you're right about general manager being intellectually challenging, making sure that all the departments have what they need to be profitable and to take good care of customers. There's a lot to that, and it's I go home exhausted from each day.
And are you ever really just at home when you turn the key in the lock and walk away from the dealership at the end of the day?
I would get calls all hours from people that needed help, needed something. Not a lot, but for the most part, yeah, you're still on, and your mind's still rolling. You're still thinking about what happened today, what I got to do tomorrow. So, yeah, it's a challenging business. I'll say that.
And I've used the term mechanic, and you use the term technician, and I'm sure there's a difference. And is it because of all the electronics, or what's the difference between a mechanic and a technician?
There isn't any difference. That word, when you're trying to recruit people and you say, I'm looking for a mechanic or I'm looking for a technician, that has a connotation that is, even to you picked up on that. So we always call them technicians now.
Okay.
It's from a recruiting standpoint.
Okay.
Sure.
Can you talk a little bit about the balance between selling new and used cars and providing parts and service?
Sure. People come in for new cars, they pretty much know what they want. They're looking for a particular model, a particular something. Used cars, they're looking for something they can afford. They're not necessarily coming in to say, oh, I want a new Mustang or a used Mustang. I want a car I can afford. I need to get to work. I need to commute. I need to do this. I need to do that. And then it's a matter of trying to fit a particular car into their budget. They may want a particular car but not be able to afford it. And at that point, then you have to figure out what fits their needs and what fits their budget. Parts, and what's interesting is we always kept a pretty good selection of the fastest moving parts, and inventory management of that is very important. Because if you come in and you need, let's say a water pump for your pickup, the expectation is you will get that truck back today. Well, if you don't have the water pump sitting on the shelf, then you got to figure out how to get a water pump so that it can go out that day. And if you don't, then your customer's not going to be very happy, because the water pump's a couple-hour job. You should be able to get it in and get it out. If you don't have the part, you can't get it in, can't get it out, and that customer comes back expecting to pick up their truck and it's not done. Then they go, So then you've got an unhappy customer. So having the right parts and being able to fill whatever the technician needs to get that car out is very important. They've done an excellent job. As they grew, we had a fleet service department, and it was truly amazing that our general manager that came from the fleet department has stocked. I mean, he's got transmissions, he's got engines, he's got everything you need, and it takes money. They've got a huge investment, and I'm not going to say how much it is, but it's a very large investment. But if you're a Tykert and you have a truck and it's blown the transmission, they can roll it in the morning, have a transmission sitting on the shelf, put it in the truck, and have that truck out in the afternoon. That truck's back making money for that guy. That's how you create good customer satisfaction. You can get it in and get it back out. So, and you have to have enough technicians. I live in another city now, and the Ford dealer, I do business with the Ford dealer. He doesn't have enough technicians, and sometimes it takes 2 or 3 weeks to get an appointment to get in. Doesn't take that long here because they've got so many technicians. They pay them well, and they keep them because they make good money doing what they're doing, so they can take in more appointments than normal.
So we hear a lot about turnover in the Dixon Fire Department, Dixon Police Department. Not a lot of turnover at DuPratt?
No. In fact, I'm thinking we have one technician that I hired in 1980. In the 80s sometime. He came from, he went to junior college, and he came in, and he was like 19 years old, and he came in and he applied for a job as a technician. I said, "What are you doing now?" "I'm working at the pheasant club, pheasant hunting club that was outside of town, picking pheasants." And I said, "Well, what makes you think you can fix cars?" "Well, I went to school for it." I said, "Tell you what, I've got a spot for you as an auto detailer." He says, "I'll take it." So he started working on cleaning up the used cars, and he started fixing the used cars. He'd find a problem and he'd fix it. Service manager found out about it, and he took him away from me and made him into a technician in his shop. He's still there. He makes good money. He's been there since the 80s, maybe early 90s, and he's 70 years old, and he's still working on cars. There's a number of people that have stuck with us for years and years and years. The fleet service advisors, those guys have all been there 20 years. But yeah, you get some turnover, and sometimes it's okay, particularly if they're not a particularly good technician. You give them jobs, and then if they don't fix them right, then they become turnover. So.
Does high customer satisfaction go with high employee retention?
I agree. Yeah, totally. It makes a big difference. Sure. Particularly in spots where they touch the customers. Anybody that's a service advisor, anybody that's in the office that fills out your paperwork, any of fleet service guys. Yeah, that makes a big difference. That it's not always a new face when they come in. Makes a big difference.
So I loved my dad. I loved my brother, but my brother and I didn't get along real well. How hard is it to work day after day after day with your dad and your brother?
It comes and goes. Some days are, great, and you have a good laugh, because you're kind of on the same page. And some days it's a little bit of a clash. I got along with my dad really, really well, and my brother and I have we've had our moments where it went great, and other moments where it wasn't quite as great. But yeah, it is. It's my wife even worked there. She ran the body shop for a while, and I had a brother-in-law that was a sales manager for a while. So it was a heck of a lot of family there for a while. So
tight quarters.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Can you talk about the changes between 1956 and 2016? Because I know huge changes in technology, but also changes in people.
Yes.
Not people, employees, but I'm talking about your customers.
Yes, you're oftentimes people aren't as loyal to a product as they used to be. People aren't as loyal to a business as they used to be. Um, People in Dixon, for the most part, bought their vehicles in town because they wanted to do business in town. I don't think anybody cares about whether they're doing business in town anymore. But, and I'll give you an example. The Giannonis bought trucks from Rossi for all those years. They liked GMC trucks. We were friends with them, but when Rossi's closed up, then they came over and bought Fords because they wanted to buy product in town. And I had a lot of respect for that. And I think most people in Dixon shopped as much as they could in Dixon. And I don't think people are that way anymore. And I think customers are a lot more informed about product than they used to be, and what they should spend, and that sort of stuff. And people shop more for a better deal than they did in '56, I think. So yeah, I think the customer base has changed significantly.
And the technology changes.
Whoa.
I mean, being a technician is completely different today.
You are absolutely right. Like I said, we used to do carburetor overhauls and valve jobs and things like that. I don't know any of that anymore. It's mostly an electrical issue of some sort, a sensor issue of some sort, and the first thing they're doing now when they come in, it's plug in and start reading what the computer's telling them, trying to find codes to figure out what exactly is going wrong.
Is it harder to diagnose issues with cars now?
It can be. It's the intermittent ones that get you. They're the ones that, if it doesn't do it when it's sitting in the stall and they're working on it, then it becomes a matter of trying to test and figure out what it could be. And then it's a matter of looking through the computer, trying to figure out if somebody has seen this problem and what solved it. In the old days, we didn't have any information. I mean, every technician was basically on its own. You had a shop manual that might help you a little bit, but not very much. But the technology now, you've got tons and tons of stuff, and then you've got, Ford has, and I'm sure every manufacturer does, is they have somebody on, they call it on the hotline. You say, hey, I've got this problem. I haven't seen it before. It does this, this, and this. And sometimes they'll say, oh, I haven't seen it. Or sometimes they'll say, oh yeah, we've seen that. We're coming out with a technical service bulletin to fix that. That's been a huge thing. And as cars got more complex, that's been very important.
Does a dealership today have to have an IT person?
Oh yeah.
To help with solving issues with inventory management?
Well, you have a computer system that has all of that in it. It has the accounting, it has, all your paperwork, all of your repair orders, all of that kind of stuff. And usually you have somebody that's at your dealership that knows the system inside and out. When they've got an issue, they can fix that kind of the things that are going wrong with your computer. You have glitches every day. You have something happens, somebody goes down, and you got to get it back up. So yeah, we don't have a specific IT person. The office manager's pretty good at it, and Pete, the owner, is pretty good at it. Rich Bedoya is pretty good at it. So it's kind of a shared job. But the big dealers that have multiple dealerships, they have IT people that visit each dealership and take care of problems.
And I assume that would be one of the higher paid positions.
Oh yeah. They're worth their weight in gold.
So looking back at all the cars you've owned and all the cars you've driven, what's your most favorite?
Oh, '69 Shelby Mustang.
Oh,
bright
man.
Yellow. It was a rental car. Dad bought it at the auction. Mom drove it for a while, didn't like it. It was too fast and too bright. And so I had it, and I drove it to college for a couple of years. And then it got vandalized because somebody thought I was a rich kid. And so I said, I'm not taking that back. So Dad ended up selling it to a good friend of mine, and he still has it. It's in his garage. So that was probably my favorite car.
That's a pretty good one to have.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. It was bright yellow, black stripes, big tires, big engine, the whole 9 yards. That was fun.
So shifting away from the car business, tell me about skiing. How did that become such a big family?
Dad skied in college, Mount Rose, and was very close to campus, and so it was a fun thing to do in the late 40s. He didn't do a lot of skiing. Well, Mom and Dad would go skiing when we were little kids. They'd leave us at home and they'd go. He would take 7 days off a year, and they would jump in the car and they'd drive over to Aspen, Colorado, to ski for a week. That was their 1 week off, and that would have been, say, 1961 till maybe 1980 or so, 85, maybe somewhere in there. They always took a ski trip. And so they got us skiing at a very young age, and we liked it. And then they put me in a program that was called Greater Sacramento Ski School, and I'd catch a bus out of Davis on a Saturday, and we'd drive up. First we went to Boreal Ridge for 1 year, and then we went to Sugar Bowl for a couple of years, and then we went to Squaw Valley for a couple of years, and we all got hooked. And so Dad borrowed money from his brother and built a little tiny cabin on Donner Lake. Well, I was a senior in high school, I guess, junior in high school. And pretty soon that was our out from the pressures of the car business. The car business is a lot of work, a lot of hours, a lot of time, a lot of stress, a lot of that, and that was our out. And so we'd go there, and it was a family activity, and we'd sit around the table and talk about our day, and then we all got into recreational racing, and so then we'd sit around the table and talk about our runs and how crummy we were, and so we had a lot of good laughs. And then my kids, we put them in a program at Squaw Valley when they were 4, and it was every Saturday for 3 or 4 months, and it was a group thing, and they'd ski with the coach, but it was very social. It was kids their age, and so they just had a ball doing it, and they'd come home, and so we'd leave Dixon on a Friday night after work. They'd put them in their jammies, and we'd drive up to the mountains. We'd carry them into the cabin, throw them in their beds. Up the next morning, then we'd go to Squaw Valley and ski all day, and they had that program. And from there, after they're 8, then they have to pick another program, and it was either ski with us for every day, or go big mountain skiing, or go racing. And they both picked racing, and they got pretty good at it. So it was a fun time.
So I want to go back to the car business for just a minute. You talk about the stress, and skiing as a release from the stress. And we've talked a little bit about stressful issues, but can you talk a little bit more about stress as a business owner? Sure.
Employees can be stressful. There's such a wide range of people that work in a dealership, and each grouping has their own problems. A lot of the technicians end up divorced, and they need they get a deduction for child support. You're always dealing with that kind of an issue. Not just technicians, but throughout the organization. There's that the stress of dealing with employees, stress of dealing with customers, unhappy customers, happy customers, making sure that you have enough money in the bank account to be able to pay your bills that particular month or that particular week, or your payroll that particular week. It's always a worry of some sort that you have to deal with, and you're so busy talking to customers that oftentimes that stuff slips, and then you all of a sudden you got a fire. So now you're going back and trying to figure out how to fix that particular issue. Because customers they take precedence. You have to deal with them. You can't just put them off and say, well, I'm busy right now, I got to take care of this. No, you got to take care of the customer first and foremost, and always. And so other stuff that you had on your list for that particular day may not get addressed if you talk to 10 customers that day. So it can be stressful.
So I want to shift and talk a little bit about your work at the bank. I don't know if you're comfortable with that.
Sure.
So I think many people may think they know what a bank board director does, but I bet most don't. Can you tell us what your duties are?
Sure. The main and most important duty is to hire the CEO. That's first and foremost. The second thing is we represent the shareholders. We are all shareholders ourselves. But we have to make sure then that the bank we are responsible for making sure the bank is meeting all of the regulatory things that are involved in, the FDIC, you have the SEC, you have all the regulatory stuff that has to be met. The banking industry is tremendously regulated by the state and by the feds. And so you have to make sure that you're well managed, that you're making a profit, and that you're making moves that you're basically guiding the management team to make sure that the bank stays profitable and goes long into the future. Bank was established in 1910, and it's still hanging in there and doing quite well.
How did you come to join the board?
My dad was on the board. When he joined, there was only the Dixon branch and maybe the Davis, maybe the Winters branch was pretty small, and we were a high-profile business, probably one of the biggest businesses in town. And so you always want to have, most of the shareholders were from Dixon or the Dixon area, and you always want to have, high-profile business people on your board. So that's how he got on. And then John Hamill was the president and CEO, and Dad got it. The retirement age used to be 65. It's 75 now, but at that time he got off, and a couple of years later they were looking for a couple of board members, and John Hamill suggested me, again, because we're high-profile business in town, and Dad had done, I assume, did a decent job at being a board member, so they figured I could probably follow in his footsteps.
And how do you keep track of how the bank is doing?
We have a monthly series of meetings, loan committee, committee meetings, and then we have a meeting of the entire board, and we go over the financials. We go over all the regulatory issues, and making sure everything is as good as we can make it for the shareholders.
And I'm sure you have to base most of your decisions on information provided by bank officers.
Correct.
How do you know that information is accurate?
You have a lot of outside audits of various things. So we look at the quality of the loan portfolio, but we have both the FDIC and an outside service that looks at that portfolio to tell us what management is telling us, see if it matches up with what the FDIC and everybody says it is. We have an internal audit, we have outside audits, we have an accounting firm that comes in and audits the books for us, and they do a very thorough job and to make sure that what we're getting reported to matches up with what's actual.
I imagine that's a pretty huge commitment of time.
Yes and no. A week out of the month, I come to Dixon every 1 week out of every month, with one or two exceptions, and we get good information. We also have calls with the CEO to fill us in on details that are pertinent, but can't wait until we get to our regular meeting. So it's a time commitment, but it's also a mental commitment that keeps my mind going, because otherwise I'm doing house maintenance and things like that, which isn't particularly stimulating. But as a result, I read the Wall Street Journal every day and go over all of the details to see what's happening in banking, what's happening in political stuff, what's happening in the economy, and things like that. So you get a feel for what's happening out there in the environment that the bank's competing in.
How important is the bank to the development of Dixon?
Well, it was established in 1910. There wasn't any other banks here, I don't believe. And farmers needed money. People needed, money. I think it was crucial for, every small town had some sort of a bank, place to keep their money. So for the development of Dixon, I think it was probably huge for years and years and years and years. It's not, and now it provides, they're part of the community. They're part of every community that we're in. They're the people that are in Winters. They participate in all kinds of events in Winters. Dixon, the Dixon people, I mean, the bank always has a float in the parade, for instance. They contribute time in all of the charitable organizations. I think they're a part of the fabric of the community, whereas a big bank like Wells, they're not really part of that. You can, Wells can still loan you money. Wells can still, take your money and put it in their safe, et cetera, et cetera. They can do all the same things we can do, but they're not really part of the community, and I think that's important. Maybe not so important in downtown San Francisco, but in a place like Dixon, I think it's important.
So we talked about how the car business has evolved. Has the bank business evolved in a similar way? And if so, how has it changed over the years?
Yes, it has changed, and mostly due to technology type of things. For instance, if somebody gives me a check and I happen to be in Utah, I can deposit that check in my First Northern Bank account. That's, think about the technology of doing that. I take a picture of it and it sends it and it goes into my account. I think that's pretty phenomenal. So yeah, the bank business has clearly changed, and technology has driven that. So many ATMs. You used to have to go to, if you wanted to get cash, you'd walk into the bank and they'd have a counter check, and you'd have to write out a counter check, made out the cash, and hand it to them, and then they'd hand you cash. I can go put my card in the ATM right now, get as much cash as I happen to need. Phenomenal. And I can do that anywhere in the world. I mean, I've done it in Europe. So absolutely phenomenal technology, and that will continue to drive it. There's also, I think when I got on the board, there were like 25,000 banks in the US. It's down to 4,000. Consolidation, consolidation, consolidation. And again, the technology drives the little guys out. So,
Good thing or a bad thing?
That's a good question. Most of those banks were all small banks in small towns, and et cetera, et cetera. Not necessarily good. I'm not sure that, and I'm picking on Wells Fargo. I'm not sure that it's good that, you know, they may be the only bank around. I think having a bank that is a part of your community and knows who you are when you walk in the door, I think that's again, I think we're losing that connection between us in these small towns. I think I think it's important that we still stay connected somehow, some way.
Besides the bank, what other connections do you have to Dixon still?
Lots of friends. I have tons of friends. I don't have any business left here. We've sold our properties. We've sold everything, but I have so many friends that, not just customers, but people I went to school with, people that were customers that became friends. Dixon's still home. I lived here from 56 until 2016. It's still home. It'll always be home, and I always feel at home when I come back, even though it's changing pretty rapidly. So,
looking back, is there anything in Dixon's growth and development that surprises you?
When I was a kid, there were no big box retailers of any kind, and now you've got, you know, Walmart sitting out there, you've got Safeway, you've got all of that kind of stuff always surprised me. The first stoplight surprised me. McDonald's surprised me. You never think of your town that way. The first four-way stop surprised me, but now the houses that are all out in all that agricultural country that I know people that used to farm that, and you look at that and you go, wow, there's just filled with houses now. And yeah, Dixon's a good place to live, and I see why we're close to everything. We're close to Sacramento, we're close to the Sierras, we're close to the Bay Area. I guess maybe it surprised me that it took so long, but every time I come to town, it looks a little different.
So my last formal question: what question should I have asked that I just didn't know enough to ask you?
Let's see. That's I think you covered it pretty darn well, actually. I can't think of anything that we didn't cover. We covered the gamut of my folks, my life here. The only thing you could have asked was about my kid's ski racing career, and I could have told you a little about that.
Well, I think we're done.
Thank you.
This has been great.
I enjoyed it.
I've really enjoyed it.
It was fun.